Well, I get the honor and privilege of introducing my friend Julie, who, when I first met Julie, it was when I first walked in these doors 10 years ago, and she was there to greet me. She was a smiling face, a warm heart, a warm hug, and somebody who I could quickly call a friend. And then we got to serve together, and we've lived life together for the last 10 years. And so, without any further ado, please welcome up my friend Julie.
Thank you, my dear. Thank you, Sarah. Just so you know, Sarah says good morning. I don't wear shoes, just so we're clear. I think better without shoes on. No, that's not true. I just don't like them. So, hi, everybody. My name is Julie. I'm an alcoholic. And it's a privilege and an honor to be here tonight. It's just amazing, the song tonight, Nothing That Our God Can't Do. That's what my life is today. I'm going to share with you a little bit tonight of what it was like, what happened, and what it's like today. So, growing up, as far back as I can remember, alcohol was a big part of our lives. When I was 4 years old, my mom and dad bought a restaurant and a bar up in northern Wisconsin. There's not much to do up there. Alcohol was a big part of our lives. My parents always seemed to have a drink in hand and were absolutely notorious for their big parties. Life was pretty good in my early years. But, you know, there was always a part of me that I just never felt like I fit in anywhere. My sister and brother were older than me, so I was alone by myself quite a bit. And, you know, and the restaurant was pretty much the center of our lives. We worked there, we ran the business, my parents did, and I started working there when I was 11 as a cook. And shortly thereafter, I took my first drink. And it was around that, you know, it was like I said, around that time. And what drinking did to me at that point is it took away those feelings of not fitting in. It took away feelings, period, which is what I was really looking for, that method of escape. So, you know, by the age of 13, I was drinking a lot. And getting alcohol for me was extremely easy. I stole everything I drank. And at night when I'd close up the kitchen, I'd always make that last stop in the walk-in cooler, grab 2 bottles of wine, and head for home. Of course, my mom had to drive home. I didn't have a driver's license yet. But in the winter, it was real easy because I wore a great big jacket, so you could put a bottle of wine in each side. So it worked great. Nobody knew I took it. You know, and that's what I did. I would go home, and after my mom went to bed, my dad would never come home from the restaurant because usually he was too drunk to drive home. And after mom was in bed, I just sat and drank my 2 bottles of wine. And, you know, it was my favorite place to drink, was at home alone in my room. You know, it was great, my 4 walls. And, you know, it was... The biggest problem with doing that, though, is my mom and dad don't drink wine, and I have 2 bottles. So how do I get rid of them? So I did devise a plan. I opened up my bedroom window, I took the screen off, and I pitched them out into the swamp, out my bedroom window. I do kind of wonder how many bottles are sitting out in that swamp today. You know, but as time went on, I realized both of my parents were alcoholics. But it didn't really dawn on me at the time that I was too. I started to drink, I wanted to drink more and more. And the wine really wasn't doing it for me. But with my mom being an alcoholic, she had vodka hidden throughout the house. And being the good, cunning alcoholic I am, I found every place that she had it hid. And I helped myself to her alcohol, her vodka. And it was great because nobody really knew what I was doing. Because again, I was by myself a lot. But at school, to the outside world, I seemed to have it all together. The all-American kid, I played basketball. I was in the top 5 people in my class. Not that that's saying much, there's only 63 in my high school class. Okay, we're just gonna not aim that high. But I played in band, but I was a typical overachiever. I excelled in everything that I was involved in, but the inside was just crumbling all apart. I just didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. I didn't have any close friends, and I always kept to myself. But when I was out in a crowd, I could appear to have it all together. I wanted to be that social interaction because I also didn't want anybody asking any questions about why I may be acting in a peculiar way. Didn't want to really get caught to find out what I was really doing. My home life was getting increasingly difficult. Alcohol was consuming my parents by this point. This is in my mid-teenage years. And the fighting had increased just tremendously in the house. And I got to play the mediator between my mom and dad when they were fighting. I am blessed that there was no physical violence at home, but it came close on several occasions. So that was kind of my high school story. And after I graduated high school, I decided to go to the nearby community college. And I went into hospitality management. It's a great career for any budding alcoholic, and any active one at that. But there came a point where I kind of crossed that line. I really felt that at this point I needed alcohol more than what I had in the past. I had just turned 18. The legal drinking age was 19. I really never drank much when I was legal. But I had someone from the school buy me a pint of whiskey because it fits easier in your backpack at school. And I had a big class on Friday, and it's a 4-hour class, but every 10 minutes to the hour we would have a break. So at 8:50 in the morning I went down to the restroom. I'm just going to take a sip because my hands are shaking by this point, and I didn't want anybody to know. Well, being the typical alcoholic, I drank the half pint in the 10-minute break. Now, probably was not a real good idea because also being the overachiever I am, I sit in the front row of the class, and pretty much everybody figured out I was drunk. Didn't take long for people to figure it out. So, especially when I started sliding off the chair under the table. Nothing happened to me that day, so I kind of thought in my mind I got away with it. But Monday came along and that professor called me into her office. It was an excruciatingly long walk to her office. It was from this podium to the back of the stage. Seemed like it took me forever to get there. But when she confronted me, before she could even say a word, I blurted out that I was an alcoholic, and I wanted to stop drinking. I really didn't know what an alcoholic was, but it just seemed to see the buzzword at the time. So she helped me get into outpatient counseling. The problem was, this is December. I couldn't get in until January, so I have this gap that I had to just kind of hang on and see how that goes. I will tell you it did not go well. Because my class had a Christmas party, and it was at a local bar. Imagine that. So my friend and I decided we get started a little bit ahead of time. So by the time we actually got to the Christmas party, I was, just shall we say, a little bit drunk. And the same professor that I had was there, and when she was getting ready to leave, I told her, and I quote, "Don't waste your time on me. This is who I am." I had the typical victim-martyr response from an alcoholic. That night I blacked out shortly thereafter. The next day I got that phone call from the professor to report to me exactly what happened the rest of the night. And long story short, I had threatened to kill myself, and she had let me know that she had gotten an appointment at the outpatient center that very night. And I was terrified, because now I actually had to do something about what I was doing. So throughout the day I was sobering up. My hands by that time shook. And I stayed with her all day, and then she took me there after school. And I struggled. I didn't do well. I didn't follow the suggestions at that time. And of course you go through Christmas and into the New Year, and of course I can't not drink. It's Christmas and New Year's. It's Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. That was my excuse. But by January of 85, I had enough, and I had stopped. Well, in February of 85, my mom went into a treatment center for alcoholism. You know, by the grace of God, she never found it necessary to ever pick up another drink again. But during that time she was there, we had a family thing for a weekend, so I had to go spend the weekend at the treatment center. And in my mind, I'm like, this is great because I can tell them all the things that they have done wrong, and everything is their fault. So I thought. But during that time, my dad did admit he was an alcoholic, and he stopped drinking at that point in time. It was during that weekend session that the question was asked to me, well, do you drink? And I said, well, no, not anymore. Don't answer a question that way because another question's coming right after it. They said, oh, really? Why not? Because the counselor stopped the session right then and there, and I had to tell him, I said, well, I've been going to outpatient treatment for my alcoholism. And that's the first time I had to tell my parents I was an alcoholic. So after my mom got out of the treatment center, the three of us started going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was quite the novel thing, mom, dad, and kid going to AA meetings. Sidebar, we didn't go to meetings in my hometown. We drove an hour away so nobody would know. No. But then again, we lived in a town of 1,700 people. Everybody knew we drank. Don't know what we were hiding, but that was the way we thought. So November of 86, my parents were struggling in their business. It was financially on the verge of collapse. So they decided to close up for the winter and come down to South Florida for the summer to work the winter season. So I had finished my 2-year degree and figured, okay, I got nothing else holding me here. I'm going to move to South Florida with them. And, you know, the problem is I took me with me, and I didn't have really any program or any support at that time when I came down here. So, you know, the one thing I found out when I got a job, I got working, surprise, surprise, in the hospitality industry as a server. I found out real quickly that bar time down here was 5 a.m. So I was like, this is cool. I love to go out and dance. Anybody who sees me around, they know I'm always moving. That's who I am. So I said, this is great. So I started hanging out at these places. I'm just going there to dance. Everybody else can drink. I'm just going to go there and dance. Well, you know, you hang out in these places long enough with no recovery, it's not going to take long for you to slip back into old behavior, which I did, and I chose to drink again. Nobody made me. I made that choice on my own. And my last drunk was March 24th, 1990, and I don't ever want to forget it. That day changed my life, because that's when I made that decision. I did not want to continue to live the way I've been living, and I didn't want to drink anymore. So I did decide to get out of the hospitality industry, went back to college, and I met a professor there. Something with me and professors, I don't know. She was a smoker, and at the time I was a smoker too, and we'd always meet out in breaks, and we'd talk, and we'd visit, and we started developing a little bit of a friendship there. And during the summer session, I had a class, and she was my instructor, so she had an issue with her car, and she needed a ride home, and I said, well, no problem, I'll give you a ride home. And so we get in, we're driving towards her car, and she said, you know, so how's your first term at Northwood? And I said, well, to be honest with you, I've been so stressed, I almost want to drink. So she says, oh, I've been sober for 4 years, and I actually knew the very next question she was going to ask me. She was going to ask me if I'm going to any meetings, which I don't like sometimes when I am right. That was her next question. So, you going to any meetings? And I had to tell her no. So the next thing she said is, why don't you come to my group? I'm like, I'm going to see this woman every day I'm in class. I think maybe I better go to the meeting. So I didn't go with the right idea going to meetings, but I'm grateful I made that step. Driving up to the meeting, at the time we met at a restaurant up in Jupiter, at 7 o'clock in the morning. You walk through the restaurant, but you get to this back room and you could hear nothing but people laughing and having a good time. And I couldn't remember the last time I laughed or I enjoyed life. So I started going, and I had asked her then to be my sponsor, and we started working through the steps. You know, and for me, step 3 was really vital in my recovery. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Growing up, the only thing I heard about God and Jesus is when my grandparents came up to visit, and they'd take me to church and they'd talk to me about it. But the rest of the family, it just kind of was a moot point. So I knew that I had to look outside of myself because, clearly I wasn't doing a good job. I was dry with no sobriety, and I was pretty miserable. So it was time for that change. So it was in that moment that I truly felt that I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. So the steps are a big part of my recovery. They were then and they are today. I remember when I first went through the steps, at first glance it was like, piece of cake, I got this made. I can do these in 5 minutes and I'm done. Then I started working them, and that's when I realized that I had to change. And the fear creeps in when I know I got to change, I got to do something different. Obviously, the way I was doing life wasn't working too well for me. So I said, okay, we're going to start changing the way I think and what I do. And it was the start of just a wonderful, wonderful journey from that point on. So after I'd been with my sponsor a while, she decided it was time for me to start dating. I didn't decide, she did. I'd been sober a year and a half. I told her I don't want to get married. I don't want to go out with somebody. I want to live alone for the rest of my life because it's easier. Were we clear on this? And she's like, no, but I know this person. And I'm like, no, do we have to do this? So I ended up agreeing, and she knew someone else who was in recovery. And the greatest place is you always meet at a meeting, so then you don't have to, you always got a way out. But the first time I actually saw him, I knew in my heart of hearts, he still can't believe it, but I said, I'm going to marry that man. I knew at the instant I met him, there was something that was just, it felt just so right to me. And, what a change of heart. Here's somebody who wants to live alone the rest of their life to, I'm going to marry him, and I just met him, But a year later after dating, he proposed to me, and July 10th of this month, we celebrated 30 years of marriage. There were a lot of growing pains along the way, but it's been totally, totally worth it. I just love him dearly. And we really wanted to have kids. The doctors told us we would never be able to have children. And it was devastating to hear that kind of news. And, we just didn't know what to do. And actually, at the time we found out, we were actually in marriage counseling. One thing I did find out after I got married, the first couple of years of marriage are not bliss, in my case. It was trying to get to know somebody and live with somebody because I'd never lived with anyone before. And we struggled in our marriage, but we both knew that we loved each other. We just didn't quite know how to live with each other at the moment. But the counseling helped, and we opened up the bridge of communication to be open and honest with one another. So we do that to this day. It's very important to have that open and honest communication, and we always reserve that time that we can have that conversation. What we realized is the friendship we had gotten before we got married is the same friendship we have to carry on and nurture through our marriage. And that's worked for us for today. So, like I said, our marriage got on track, and I wasn't feeling well and went to the doctor, and yep, you guessed it, I was pregnant. And the doctor said it couldn't be done. So we were ecstatic. And on December 13th of 1997, I gave birth to our son. And it was awesome. We were so grateful and thank God for this beautiful little boy that we were told we would never be able to have. And then shortly after his birth, he got very, very sick. And he had been in and out of the hospital several times after he was born. And on December 22nd, I went to check on him, and he was lethargic and non-responsive. And we had to readmit him into the hospital again in the ICU. Well, NICU was full, so they put us in the pediatric ward. And the doctors basically came in and told us that there was nothing more they could do for him, and they didn't think he was going to make it. And what do I do with this? I'm sober. but I had to trust God with it. And in that moment, I just prayed. As heartbreaking as it was, I said, God, your will, not mine, be done. If he's meant to stay, wonderful. If you're going to take him home, it's okay too. It's going to hurt, but I'm okay with it now. And I had been going to a different church by this time, and I called. Now, it's Christmas Eve, guys. You know, it's the busiest day of the church calendar. Nobody's usually available, but the pastor found out and made time, and he came down to the hospital room, and we prayed over Corey that day, and and just left it be at that. And it was a very quiet afternoon. Somewhere about 5 o'clock Christmas Eve night, his head popped up. He looked around like, here I am, I'm ready. And we were just like stunned. The nurses come running in, the doctors come running. They couldn't believe it. Everything was normal. Everything was normal. And we picked up that little boy and walked out of that hospital Christmas morning, 1997. Never to look back. And we were just so grateful. We never were able to have any other children, but, God had a plan, and I had to trust that, because as he was growing up, we noticed there was some developmental issues with our son, and got him tested and found out at age 5 he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. And God put the right people in our lives at the right time. We got him hooked up with different therapies, to help with the communication, the motor skills, and all of that good stuff. It was a lot of hard work. It was, exhausting at times, but so rewarding, because that little boy grew up, graduated high school. He graduated with a degree in pastry arts, and he works as a pastry chef today with aspirations of owning his own bakery one day. So, yeah, it's quite amazing. So, fast forward a little bit, when another life challenge really came on in January of 2014. We had just dropped our son off. We were going to COH by this time. We came here in 2009 and dropped our son off. They were going on a ski trip for the youth group. And my mom hadn't been feeling good, so I got a call that day that they were taking her to the hospital. They didn't know what was wrong. She had cold-like symptoms at Christmas, so she wasn't getting any better, so they took her over to the hospital. And she was admitted. They started running numerous tests. And since we didn't have our son, we were going to have all these plans, but we ended up planning our whole weekend and spent it at the hospital the entire weekend with my mom. And I'm really grateful we did, because it gave us that extra time. So about January 6th, my mom was diagnosed with small cell lung cancer, and she died on the 14th of January. And it happened fast. It was unexpected. I love her so much. She was almost 29 years sober when she passed away. And I miss her a lot, but I've come to realize how much I am like her. So there's a part of me part of her that's with me every day. And I don't want to ever forget that. So a year later, we come to January of 2015. You're going to get the theme. I don't like January, because it's just a tough month. But that's okay. God's walked us through all of it. I was at work. I received a phone call from my brother-in-law. My husband had a heart attack and was being rushed to the hospital. So when I hung up the phone, I had a decision to make. Run out the door on my own laurels, or stop and pray and invite God in. And I opted to stop and pray and invite God in. And as I was going out the door, I worked in a department with a lot of Christian women and men, and I just told them, my husband's had a heart attack, and they were praying all the way out as I was going out the door. By the time I got to the hospital, I had received several phone calls from the COH staff. News got back to them quick. I hadn't made any calls, but there were enough people that could know enough people to get the calls going. So there was a lot of prayer going, and I was able to see my husband in the emergency room, and he told me he was in so much pain and he could hardly breathe. Truth be told, he really hadn't had the heart attack yet, but it was getting close. And there was nothing I could do. He was taken back to the cath lab, and at the time I really didn't know what a cath lab was. I had no idea what any of this heart stuff was. And then they sent us all to the waiting room. I was there with my sister and brother-in-law. And while we were there, we heard over the PA a code blue. I didn't know until later that that was my husband, and he had coded on the table. He had a massive heart attack and died, and they brought him back. And I'm grateful for that. What a blessing. My husband shared with me that night that he felt the warm hand of God holding his heart. And if you ask him today, he still feels it. And it just gives me that hope each and every day that we have a life that's beyond anything. So during this last year, my dad had hip replacement surgery and had to go to rehab after. Once he was out of rehab, he stayed with us, which brought up a lot of issues from the past. Long story short, he said he prefers to be with his girlfriend's family over his own. And it hurt a lot. But I came to accept that he has to live his own life and needs to live it the way he chooses for himself. It's not my business. And I will always be there if ever he needs me, because I love him no matter what, just the way he is. So the most incredible thing about these life-changing events is the peace I felt because of the word of Jesus. I never once thought of picking up a drink or wanting to run away. I was able to reach out and ask for help, something I would not be able to do if I'd still been drinking. God has given me the tremendous gift of sobriety. He has shown me how to love, show grace and mercy to others, because he has done that for me. Had God not intervened in my life, I would not be here today. And I try to remember that each and every day. I continue to do the same things I did when I first got sober. I continue working the steps. I have prayer and meditation daily to help me focus on more personal, intimate relationship with Christ. I currently don't have a sponsor yet, I gotta be honest, but I have accountability partners and friends that help keep me honest each and every day in my life. They don't let me get away with stuff, and that's why I love them all very much. So, but there is someone I have in mind. I just got to ask her now. She's going to be my sponsor, so stay tuned. Because a sponsor is an important part of recovery. We can't do this alone. I tried, and it was miserable, and I almost failed. I did fail. But I got back up and came in. So in order to keep this gift, I have to give it away. I've learned to be a responsible member of the human race. And when I've been asked to serve, I say yes. That's why I'm here tonight. And I hope that something I've said today or shared with you may help you along the way. Love you all. Thanks.